Hello, everybody. Welcome to VenTalk Live. My name is Joshua, and it feels great to be back. Okay, from a few months worth break. But before we continue, on behalf of our viewers, good evening, Venerable Pensi. Tonight we are going to discuss a very interesting topic in Buddhism, and some of y'all might have heard it before. It's rebirth. Okay, so before I waste too much of your time, let's start by asking Venerable. So for many Venerable, for many people, rebirth is just one of many speculations on what happens to a person after he or she pass on or die. But for us Buddhists, is it important for us to actually believe in rebirth?
Yes, Joshua, it's important for Buddhists to believe in rebirth. And not only just believe in rebirth, but to gain firm conviction about the truth of rebirth through familiarizing with the many evidence of rebirth and then contemplating about the different theories of afterlife, and then coming to the conclusion that rebirth is the only possible outcome after death.
Oh, but can I ask, why is it important for Buddhists to believe in this rebirth? Or should I ask, can we still be considered as a good Buddhist if, let's say, we don't believe in rebirth?
When you use the word good Buddhist, actually the word good is very vague. If you mean through learning and practicing the Buddha's teachings, I can become a happy person through being virtuous, kind, compassionate, then it is true that you can achieve that without necessarily belief in rebirth. And if all that you are looking for through practicing the Buddha's teachings is to gain peace of mind, have harmonious relationships with people around you, harmonious family, good friends, then again I can tell you it's actually not absolutely necessarily to learn the Buddha's teachings. Or I should say, if you learn the Buddha's teachings, you can also achieve that. But it is not the only way. Okay, so in other words, if the happiness of this life is only what you are concerned with, it is actually not absolutely necessary to learn the Buddha's teachings. You can also obtain the happiness of this life through other means, such as other religions, other secular teachings, because there are many such motivational speakers around.
Oh, then if happiness in this life is not what Buddhists should be seeking for through his teachings or through Buddha's teachings, then what exactly are we looking for?
Well, actually, it's not that we shouldn't seek for happiness of this life. Okay, it's not wrong to seek happiness of this life, but it is not enough. It is not enough for a so-called good Buddhist to just seek happiness of this life. The Buddha took birth in this world because he wants to give us not only just happiness of this life, because he knew that there's rebirth. So if our vision, if our goal is only limited to this life and we do not think about future life, we do not prepare for future life, then we will meet with suffering in our future life because we did not fully prepare for it. And that day will come because you will die one day and you will take rebirth. In other words, just learning the Buddha's teachings to gain happiness of this life is not the ultimate purpose of learning the Buddha's teachings. We are not going to get the full benefits of the Buddha's teachings as the Buddha intended if we are just only aiming for happiness of this life.
So I see if I get this right now. So the reason for why it's maybe not enough to just learn the Buddha's teaching to be a happy person in this life, right? And without thinking of the future life, it's because there is something after death, and there's something that comes after for us. And if you're not prepared for it, maybe, or not say maybe, we will meet suffering in the future lives. And the Buddha actually chose to appear in this world, right? It's because he wants to teach us methods or ways so that we are prepared for what's going to come, which is the future life. And if you're not doing that, then you're not actually getting the full benefits of what he has prepared for us.
Yes, correct. Okay, because there is rebirth. Yes, and this cycle of birth and death is making us suffer. So the Buddha, he wants to help us solve this problem by gaining the ability to liberate ourselves from this cycle of birth and death. And then the other solution is also to become a Buddha just like him. And this takes many lifetimes of spiritual practice, whether you want to gain liberation from cyclic existence or you want to achieve Buddhahood. Okay, so in this life, we must prepare ourselves for our future lives so that we can continue to meet with the right conditions to continue our practice in our next life. And if we meet the right conditions, actually, we will also be a happy person in our next life. So rebirth is such a central concept in Buddhism that the vast majority of the Buddha scriptures, whether Theravada's teachings or Mahayana scriptures, make reference to past and future lives. So most of the Buddha's teachings will become meaningless if rebirth is not true. In fact, not believing in rebirth and karma is considered a serious wrong view that would impede us in learning the Buddha's teachings. It is one of the 8 states that constitute lack of leisure and human opportunity, as we covered in last October's VenTalk on the precious human rebirth. My personal opinion is that rebirth is such a central concept in Buddhism that if a Buddhist claims that he doesn't believe in rebirth, it is as far-fetched as a Christian saying that he doesn't believe in heaven and hell.
In that case, then, can we or how can we be convinced that there is rebirth? Like, should we just take the Buddha's word for it, like because he said so, so we need to believe? Because so far there are no actually scientific evidence that rebirth actually exists. And since the scientists can't prove that rebirth exists, how can we convince ourselves that actually such thing really do exist?
Yes, in modern times, scientific evidence is the golden standard for proving something exists and is true. However, in the case of rebirth, it will probably be a long time before it can be proven to the standard of scientific evidence. Because so far, science is only focused on studying phenomena that have physical properties and that can be measured. In other words, properties that we can sense with our 5 senses. Scientific evidence requires the evidence to be perceivable by our 5 senses, our eyes, ear, nose, tongue, our body. But because rebirth belongs to the spiritual realm, and since the spiritual realm cannot be perceived directly by our 5 senses, so it will be impossible to gather evidence on the spiritual realms in a way that qualifies it as scientific evidence. However, even though there are no evidence that can qualify as scientific evidence, there is many compelling evidence on rebirth from research by scientists and professionals who have been scientifically trained and using rules followed by the scientific method. Okay, so for example, there's a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Brian Weiss. He discovered past life by accident. It started at a time when he was treating a patient who had come to see him for help with her many phobias. One method that psychiatrists use to treat phobia is to help their patients recall an incident which may cause them to have this fear. For example, for fear of water, it could be an incident during childhood when the patient nearly drowned. But because this incident is so traumatic, the brain actually will erase it from the conscious memory. Okay, so the patient, he or she will not be able to remember that they nearly drowned. But the memory is still there in the subconscious, and it manifests itself as a phobia of water. When this patient came to see Dr. Weiss, he tried to help the patient recall whether there are any incidents in her childhood that caused her to have her phobias. One technique to do that is through hypnosis. In a very relaxed state of mind, the patient can more easily recall past incidents. So Dr. Weiss brought this person to recall her past experience through hypnosis. However, even when she was brought back to her childhood memories, they could not find any incident that caused her phobias. Then Dr. Wales decided to bring her back to her childhood memories, and Dr. Wales decided to bring her back beyond her childhood memories, and she went into past life recall. For her water phobia, they found that she was drowned in one of her past lives. That is the cause of her phobia of water. She was cured of the phobia after that, but it also triggered Dr. Wales' interest in past life research, which is what he did, and he wrote his experience in many of the books that you see here. Dr. Wales' story is just one of many. I have personally also met a psychiatrist who practiced hypnosis, and he told me that past life recall really happens.
Oh, actually, these stories, right, they're quite interesting, and it really increased or helped me have more confidence in this theory that the afterlife might actually exist. But as a human with little wisdom, there's still some I'm not sure. So there's still some doubts that this doctor, the ways that he used is, I'm not sure whether they are really scientific. And so I'm here to ask, are there any researchers or any other researchers that did conduct research on past life using maybe more scientific methods?
Yes, there is. There's this book by the title of Old Souls by Tom Schroeder. This book documents the work of a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia, who conducted past life and reincarnation research in Lebanon, India, and the American South. Dr. Stevenson's methods involve listening to stories, comparing different variants of the stories, and then verifying the truth of the empirical claims and constructing long, detailed narratives that attempt to capture the complex experience of his subjects, who claim to remember incidents from past lives. Dr. Stevenson's method is similar to those researchers who study human culture, the anthropologists.
Oh, Van, then can you share more about how this Dr. Stevenson actually executed his research?
Okay, Dr. Stevenson went to places he heard had children who could recall their past life to search for them, and he found over 2,000 children who could do that. His purpose is to verify whether their stories are true. So how did he do it? The way he did this was to go around, to go and find the person from the child's past life using the name, place, phone number, and other information provided by the child. For example, if the child say, in my previous life, this is where I stay, this is the address. My parents were so and so. Dr. Stevenson will use this information to actually go and look for the parents. He did this for over 2,000 children to verify that there is such a thing as past life. Then 20 years later, Tom Schroeder, the author of the book that you see here, found out about the work that Stevenson is doing. He went to find Dr. Stevenson and asked for the records of these over 2,000 children and offered to write a book on this. So this is the book that you see here on the PPT. And the title is called Old Souls. At the time this book was written, Dr. Stevenson was already over 80 years old. But he still brought Schroeder to the Middle East to interview the children that he had researched before. This book is a description of these trips. In one example, there was a lady who was interviewed by Stevenson 20 years ago. She was 5 years old then. Her mother told Stevenson that the girl started speaking when she was just 1 year old. And she started mentioning the names of a few people. Her mother asked her who they are, and the girl replied that they are people she knew. When her mom asked for more information, the girl replied that her brain is still small and she will give her mom more information when she grows older. Then when the girl was 5 years old, she could give detailed information of her family from her past life. The girl is able to remember where she lived, the names and phone numbers of her husband from her previous life. That family was from Beirut in Lebanon. So Stevenson went to Beirut to look for that family. That is the girl's family from her past life. And he found her husband. The girl actually died from a difficult childbirth at age 34 years old in her previous life. Later, Stevenson brought the girl to Beirut to meet her family from her previous life. When the girl saw her husband, she ran over to sit on her lap. And later, the girl found that her husband from her previous life had remarried. And she was very sad. She told her husband, "Didn't you say to me you only love me? But now you marry another person." When Schroeder went with Stevenson to see this girl, she was already over 20 years old and studying in the university. But up until then, the girl did not have any boyfriend because she still thought of her husband. She was still thinking of her husband from her previous life. And she still cries when she recalls her previous life. Yeah, so the above are just two books written by professionals trained in the scientific method. And they are from the Western culture where rebirth is not a common concept. If you search on Google, you will also be able to find many other books on this topic. So this is another example. There is also a boy by the name of James Leninger who is able to give very detailed description of his previous life as a World War II pilot. With the information given by him, his parents is able to find the family and friends from his previous life. His case is widely available on the internet. Okay, so you can actually go and do some research. So there's so much evidence of past life that it cannot just be discounted.
Oh, actually, these stories, they are quite, I would say, interesting. As like what you said, it's not a very common concept in the Western world where rebirth, it's being said. Like for us, in more Asian countries, our parents will tell us about rebirth or stories like that we've seen on TV. But there is still a but that these stories are a bit far away from us. But so I want to ask, Venerable, have you actually personally encountered anyone who is able to recall their past life?
There are actually stories from students here in BW Monastery. I've heard people mentioning. Okay, but the one that I personally hear from is from a student who had an out-of-body experience. On a trip to the Great Wall, she fell on one of the steep staircase on the Great Wall. Okay, and then she fell unconscious. However, in her next moment, she actually found herself looking down at herself, okay, from the top. Okay, so she was like floating, above her body and then looking down. And she saw her friends surrounding her, anxiously trying to revive her. Then after that, she fell back into her body and then she started to feel the pain in her head. Okay, so that's one case. Then also practitioners who go into a very deep state of concentration during meditation are also able to have out-of-body experiences. I have met a devotee, he actually came to me. Okay, he had out-of-body experiences at night before he sleeps when he relaxes his body. So before he sleeps, he will relax his body and then he find that he can actually come out of the body. So he came to ask me why this is happening. Yeah, so I told him he must have practiced meditation to a very advanced stage in his past life. So now in this life, even though he didn't actually learn meditation, but when he relaxes his body, he's able to have this out-of-body experience. So this out-of-body experience tells us that our physical body and consciousness are separate continuums. This implies that when the physical body dies, our consciousness will not die with the physical body, but will continue on into a next life. So even though there may not be any evidence that is considered scientific according to the scientific method, but there are many compelling circumstantial evidence. In fact, there are so many evidence that rebirth is the only possible explanation for all these phenomena. The one life theory could hardly explain them.
There's this. Okay, I should say this first. There are a lot of evidence pointing towards, rebirth being really existent, and Venerable also explained or mentioned that about out-of-body experiences. And actually, for me, I've also encountered people who have such experiences. One of it will be I've heard it from in my secondary school. I've heard it from my maths teacher who happened to be a Buddhist and who practiced meditation also. So I've heard that a few times when he was in his meditation, he was able to feel himself and see himself floating out of his body. And I think that's one. Another one would be, this is much more closer to me, is that my mom, so a few years ago, she had a bad fall in the washroom. And yeah, so a bit sad. Okay, so when she fell, after the incident, she recalled that as she fell, right, she was able to see herself falling. It was like she was standing from another position, looking at herself, and it was quite strange for her. And now that I think of it, maybe that is what we call an out-of-body experience. But having that said, right, because that haven't happened on me, so I will still have my doubts on whether cyclic existence or this rebirth, it truly exists. So is there any evidence that we can directly experience? So for a person like me, they can really experience, and it shows that we actually do undergo rebirth. So because for those who have never met anyone with such experience, or for me, I haven't experienced it for myself, right? These evidence are still based on other people's experiences.
Good question. Actually, we can also infer the truth of rebirth based on our own personal experience. And everyone has this experience. Okay, so for example, right, as we grow older, we will notice that our 5 senses, okay, and our other attributes that depends on our physical body, okay, such as our stamina, our strength, our eyesight, our hearing, our smell. Okay, so all these attributes that depends on our physical body, you actually grow stronger as we grow up from a child into a mature adult. Okay, and then after that, when we reach middle age and then our body starts to degenerate, we will find that all these physical attributes, our stamina, our eyesight, etc., will start to degenerate along with our physical body as we age into our old age. However, if you notice, those spiritual attributes that depends on our consciousness, such as our emotions, okay, so emotions like anger, happiness, kindness, compassion, wisdom, greed, fear, these emotions do not diminish with our physical body as we age. As our physical body weakens, these mental states remain just as strong. We still get equally angry when people offend us, correct? We still feel greed for things that we are attached to, and then we still feel happy when things go our way, and we feel afraid when our lives are in danger. And even on the day when we are about to pass away, these feelings remain just as strong as when we are young. So just like we discussed in last month's VenTalk on mindfulness of death, if we don't prepare for death, we will be overcome by fear at the moment of death. If our consciousness ages like the physical body and is then extinguished at the moment of death, then we won't see people filled with fear or regret at their deathbed. Everyone will pass away peacefully, just like a candle flame burning itself out gradually at the end of its life. Okay, so in short, our consciousness is independent of our body because it doesn't depend on our physical body. Our consciousness, we can see this by knowing that our consciousness doesn't age with time. It remains as strong as ever with the passage of time. So it follows that when our physical body passes away, our consciousness will continue on. It will not stop functioning like our physical body. So where will it go to? It takes on another body. It undergoes rebirth.
Wow. That was actually quite a interesting logic for us to follow. But Fasil, can I ask you, are we running out of time?
We will continue what we want to cover.
All right. Sorry. Okay, so continuing from just now, can I say that, or let me see if I get what Ven said. Okay, so our emotions is like an ability. So looking at the people around me, running is an ability, and being happy or angry, or having empathy. All these are also abilities. But the abilities that remain as strong in a person, whether this person is a child or this person is a young adult or in his middle age, right? The physical ability will degenerate, while all these more emotional or more mental abilities, like emotions, they're actually as strong as ever.
Yes, correct. That is exactly what I meant. While our physical abilities will age with our body, our emotional abilities do not. So it will not die with the physical body at the end of this life, but take on another life.
Oh, then Ben, did the Buddha actually give any evidence of rebirth, or is it something that we need to just take the Buddha's word for it? Like just because he said so it's something that we need to have faith in.
Yeah, like I mentioned just now, the vast majority of the Buddhist scriptures, whether Theravada or Mahayana scriptures, make reference to past and future life. But we can actually also, through logical reasoning, we can establish the truth of rebirth and the irrational of the one life theory. I think one reason why people find one life theory more acceptable than rebirth is that it's easier to fathom the idea of a beginning and an end, because this is how we perceive things around us. This way of perceiving life actually leads to many flaws and causes us a lot of suffering, because it is not in accord with reality. So for example, right, when we think about the things around us, okay, so let's say this handphone. Okay, we tend to think that the beginning of this handphone is when the handphone is assembled at the factory. That is when the handphone is born. But in actual fact, is that the very beginning of the handphone? No, because before this handphone, there are the components from which the handphone is assembled. And then before the components are manufactured, there are the different raw materials from which the components are manufactured from. And then before the raw materials is the mineral ore in the mines and so on. So you can always find a previous state of the thing that you are talking about. So in other words, all things in this world must come from a cause, a previous state. Things do not arise out of nothing. And so the same goes with our physical body. We may think that the day we are born is our beginning. But before we are born, our previous state is the fetus in our mother's womb. Then the fetus comes from our parents' sperm and eggs. The sperm and eggs then come from our parents' body. And our parents' body then comes from our grandparents' sperm and egg and so on.
Yes, actually I agree in that. Like our physical body comes from our parents, which is actually quite well established and common knowledge. But actually the other thing, which is our consciousness, like where does our consciousness actually come from?
Yes, earlier we have established that our consciousness is a separate continuum from our physical body. As with everything else, our consciousness of this life do not arise out of nothingness. It comes from causes. There is actually a previous state prior to this life. So where do our consciousness come from before we are born? Our consciousness could not have come from the sperm and egg of our parents. because they are discordant causes. The sperm and egg are physical entities, whereas the consciousness is a mental entity. Our consciousness also could not have come from the consciousness of our parents, because we do not inherit any of the experiences. Okay, so where do our consciousness come from before we are born? It could only come from a previous life.
Oh, actually, I need to thank Venerable, all these evidence and reasoning points to the existence of rebirth. But it's still actually quite difficult for many people to gain conviction without experiencing it for themselves. That, for example, we cannot remember our past life, and if I have a past life, then it will be quite logical to say that I will be able to remember it. But I just can't remember it like how I can remember things that happened last year.
Not able to remember something doesn't mean that something doesn't exist. Our memories are not perfect. Okay, so for example, are you able to remember what happened to you in the first year of your life? Are you able to remember what happened on the day of your birth, which is such an important day?
Actually, no, I can't remember those things at all.
That is right. You cannot say that you are not born into this world because you can't remember that you are born. Besides, there are many children who remember, just like those documented by Ian Stevenson, and just like the boy who remembered his previous life as a World War II pilot. Who knows, maybe you remember your past life when you are young, but your parents probably think that it's just your imagination and then dismiss it.
That's quite true. Yeah, I do agree with it, but it's actually difficult for some people to be convinced about rebirth. Like I can't remember the day of my birth, but I see babies getting born. Yeah, and my parents can tell me that I was indeed born on my birthday. So, but for the hardcore skeptics who insist that, okay, I need to see to believe in this, can they still continue to be a Buddhist without having firm conviction in rebirth?
Yes, of course you can still continue to be a Buddhist, but don't just stop there. As a Buddhist, since the Buddha teaches us that there is rebirth, we need to remain open-minded, that what the Buddha teaches us is the truth, and put in our effort to verify the truth taught by the Buddha. Conviction in rebirth can be developed through learning more about those evidence of rebirth, such as those that we have covered above, and then analyzing and contemplating it for yourself about the different possibilities. So the Buddha is not just asking you to believe and just to take his words for it. Okay, so this, in the sutra, okay, so an example here is the flower ornament sutra. The Buddhas also tell us, just as a goldsmith would test his gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it, so you must examine my words and accept them, and then accept them, but not merely out of reverence for me. So you shouldn't accept the Buddha's words just because he says it, but you also shouldn't just dismiss it as something made up by the Buddha, or that he's just going along with popular beliefs just because you find the topic far-fetched or difficult to accept. Okay, because there are actually many concepts in Buddhism that are totally foreign to us, ordinary beings. Instead, what should we do? Okay, we must put in our effort to verify the truth of it. If you can do this, you will definitely be able to gain conviction of its truth. This is actually how we expand our horizon and develop our wisdom through the Buddha's teachings.
Then can we actually or really develop conviction in the Buddha's word just by listening and thinking about them?
Yes, we don't have to personally experience something to be convinced of the truth of it. For example, let's say you don't have enough money now. You will not go out you will not think of going out to rob someone, right? Even if you or someone that you know have never been robbed before. But through reading about the harm of robbing someone, through reading news of robbers being brought to justice, through learning about morality, In other words, through education, okay, you can be convinced of the truth that robbing someone is wrong and should be avoided. You do not need to personally experience being robbed to be convinced of that.
Actually, that's quite true. But or for the case of Rebirth, where can we start to gain conviction of it?
Yes, you can start from the stories about past life. Okay, so you can go and read those books that I've introduced above. Okay, and then think through all the arguments that we have covered. The video recording of this VenTalk will continue to be available on our YouTube and Facebook if you need to watch it again. Okay, then I will also recommend reading this book, chapter 7 of this book, The Foundation of Buddhist Practice by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Children. His Holiness gave a very detailed explanation of the nature of our mind and why rebirth is the only possible outcome after death in this chapter.
Oh, actually, I know I've said this a lot of times in this session, but I feel that on behalf of everyone, I need to thank Venerable for giving us so much information and giving us so much, I can say, food for thought. But sadly, I think time is up. So I think it's only proper that I can do a summary of what we have learned, just very lightly in 3 points. So the first one is that what we have heard is, as a Buddhist, it would be much more beneficial for us to have conviction in cyclic existence and rebirth. But Buddha also agrees that it's that we should not take his words for it and merely out of respect of blind faith, just like what the text said in the previous slide. But through logical contemplation, reading stories, reading up on experiments like the one done by Dr. Stevenson, it's actually possible, not necessarily possible, I think we can, it's a confirmation that we can generate a correct conviction in the existence of future lives and rebirth.
Yes, I hope everyone has gained a better understanding, okay, and more conviction about the truth of rebirth through this session. So now the next question, now that we know that there's such a thing as rebirth, then what happens after death? Where do we go to in our next life? And how do we find meaning? How do we find meaning in this recurring cycle of life and death? What is the meaning of life? So the answers to that will be in our next month's VenTalk. Okay, so do join us on 6th of March again to find out what is the purpose of life if we have to come back again and again. Okay, so finally, let us do dedication. Okay, so you can recite this together. May these profound merits and virtues be dedicated to all sentient beings. May we eliminate all karmic obstacles, and together may we attain the state of Buddhahood. Okay, thank you very much, Joshua, for hosting this session.
Thank you, Fasil, and thank you everyone for having me today. I learned a lot, and hopefully you did too.
Okay, good night, everyone. Bye.